Now it's time to talk about grids. And grids are one of my favorite tools in studio lighting that it actually took me a really long time to hear about or learn about. What grids do is they give you control. They take the spread of light, the light just going everywhere, and it narrows it. It focuses it for you. And when I use grids, I'm using it for a variety of different reasons. It could be to put a focus light on the face, or maybe a little highlight on a prop, or a piece of jewelry, or maybe a highlight on the background to separate the subject out. So grids are definitely something that you're going to want to learn if you want to really understand how to control light. So I'm going to take a moment, explain grids from the very beginning, and then show you a variety of ways that you can use them in the studio. All right, so let me get some basic grids here. Grids are made for a variety of different modifiers. They make grids for strip softboxes, large softboxes, octaboxes. They make grids that fit in zoom reflectors, and then some brands even make grids that fit directly on the strobe. And that's actually what I'm going to be using today. With my ProPhoto D1s, these grids focus the light by going directly on the head itself. However, for your brand, you may need the zoom reflectors, and the grids actually pop into those. So here's how it works. Grids come in a variety of different sizes. Now, the smaller the number, the more focused the light. And also the smaller the number, the smaller the holes. For example, the smallest degree grid I have is a 5-degree grid here. So a 5-degree grid, it's a very small number, very small holes, very small spread of light. It's going to be a very, very focused beam of light. And then the next size up I have is 10, and then I have 20. So each one of these is going to control the spread of light in a different way. Now for some soft boxes, there's only going to be one grid. For beauty dishes, it's one size grid. But in this example, the sizes vary to give me control. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you exactly what happens. I'm going to take a photo right now of my strobe pointed at the background, and there's no modifier on it whatsoever. It's a bare bulb, and that light is going to spread everywhere. But there are plenty of instances where I want more control, so we're going to compare the 5, the 10, and the 20-degree grid. All right, so let's take one shot, no modifier on it whatsoever, bare bulb, and you can see the spread of light. All right, so basically the light is spreading everywhere. It lights the entire background. It is a little bit more focused in the center because of fall off of light. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on my first grid. I already told you that I have a 5, 10, and 20-degree grid, but these numbers, they don't necessarily mean anything to you because the numbers depend on the brand of lighting that you have. So maybe your brand, it's 15, 30, 45. Just the important part is the smaller the number, the more focused the light. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put on the largest number that I have, which is 20, which means the biggest holes, which means it lights the largest area. So putting on the 20, you can already see with the modeling light that I've begun to focus the beam. So let's take a shot with the 20 on. And already you can see that that beam of light has narrowed dramatically. I mean, it's completely changed the way that the light looks. It's no longer covering the entire background, but instead a circle in the center. And so now, let's take a look at what a 10 will do. I told you the smaller the number, the more focused the light is going to be. So let me switch over from a 20 to a 10. It's going to be a little bit more focused. And so you can see again, from 20 to 10, it goes from no grid, 20-degree grid, 10-degree grid, and guess what happens with the 5? Even tighter. So switching from the 10, let's go over to the 5-degree grid. Okay. You can see it with the modeling light, exactly what's happening already. I have such a tiny focused area of light. When I was first learning studio lighting, I had no idea about grids, so I didn't realize you could do this. So anytime you see that little pocket of light, maybe a little glow of light on the background, this is how it's achieved, or this is one of the ways that it's achieved. So when you buy grids, you can buy them in sets if it's the type that fits directly on the light. But let's say that you're using a modifier that only has one size grid. There's only one size they make for it. Or maybe you only buy one grid. There is still a way to change how the light spreads. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to the 20, okay? So let's pretend I only have the 20-degree grid. Okay. So let me take a shot. I've got my 20-degree grid. But let's say, I wanted the light to be focused, but this is a little bit too much. I wanted to narrow the beam, but I didn't want it to be only lighting that small of the area on the background. Maybe it's because I'm lighting somebody 3/4 length and I want a halo of light that covers more behind their body, and that maybe the 20 is too tight. Well, what can I do? Well, I don't have another grid to change to that would spread the light more. So instead what I can do is I can change the position or the distance of this light. I've described light many, many, many times as a bucket of water. If I take the bucket of water, and let's say this is the wall or the background, and I throw it very close, it stays very focused. But if I back up, the water has more time to spread out, or the light has more time to spread out. So if I don't want such a focused beam of light, the next thing I can do is I can move the light further away from the background. So it makes the area it covers larger, spreads it out. You will see as I move this light in and out, it's going to change the exposure because of the inverse square law. So it's going to change. If I move it further away from the background, it'll become dimmer, which I can just turn up the power of the light. Or if I move it closer, it's going to appear to become brighter, and I can turn it down. So let me show you. Let's say I want a wider spread of light. I can move the grid further away. And now you'll see that I get a much wider spread of light. The downside is you need space. As you can see, I'm already near the edge of my background. So if you're in a very small studio and you want to have a kind of a wider area, it's going to be beneficial for you to have different size grids instead of just sticking with one. All right, now let's just watch the opposite of this. I'm going to take that grid all the way in really close to the background. Again, it's the 20. When I bring it in really, really close, it's going to get really, really focused. Let's take the 20, same thing, all the way in, or pretty close. You can see what's happening with the modeling light. And of course, it's going to be much brighter because that light doesn't have time to spread out. It stays really focused. So that area is really wet. Okay, so notice, much more focused, but much brighter. So how do I actually use this in my photography? So these grids, the ones that fit directly on the heads or the ones that fit into the zoom reflectors, I use it most often if I want maybe a gradient on my background. I want the background to be dark, but I would like a halo behind the head. Or maybe just a little kiss of light that you can see maybe on the sides of the subject's waist or their hips, behind it, just a little bit of glow. I'll use that on the background. Or I once did a shoot that was kind of a cosplay themed where the girl had a fake gun and I had her all rim lit and you couldn't see what it was. So I took that grid and pointed it at that gun just to give it a little bit of a kiss of light, a little bit of a shine. Or I've done a beauty shoot where I had the hair out to the side and I just wanted a little bit more light just to the hair, but not on the face. So I pointed the grid just at the hair. Like, it gives you control that you usually don't have with other modifiers. I use it all the time if I'm doing film noir, grid tight on the face. So it's all about control. Whenever you want a narrow beam of light or you want more control, consider using grids. So this is the basics of grids, but there are other benefits or there are other ways to use them. So we're going to take a look now for adding a grid to one of my favorite modifiers, the beauty dish, so you can see some other benefits of using grids besides just, say, lighting the background. We've taken a look at how grids can focus the light, but now I'm going to show you how I use a grid to control light on my main light on the subject. All right, so if you take a look, right now I'm using a beauty dish, and you can see where the light is falling on my subject. It falls from head to toe, and if you look at the floor, you can actually see the light pooling on the floor. So I don't really have that much control over the light. There's a lot of spread. I'm going to take a photo of this so you can see the difference once I add a grid. But first, let me take a meter reading so I can see where we're starting out here. All right, so, all right. I am right around F11 to F13, so I'm going to shoot at F13, all right? So now, let's take a shot and see what's happening. So you can see this beauty dish, lights from head to toe, and a lot of that beauty dish light is also hitting the background. Now, on the left-hand side of the frame, there's a shadow cast by her body, but the light is reaching all the way to the background. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a grid. And again, they make these grids for soft boxes and octaboxes and strip soft boxes. And for this particular beauty dish, there's only one size. It's the 25-degree grid. And it's going to fit right on the front of that beauty dish. So I'm going to add it, and I'm going to take a meter reading again. Because when I add a grid, I'm going to lose a little bit of light, and I need to compensate. All right. Yeah. All right, perfect. Okay, let me take one more meter reading. So from, let's see. All right, so I lose just about a stop of light by adding the grid, a little bit, 2/3 of a stop to a stop of light. So I'm going to compensate for that. But here's what you need to think about. One way to describe what a grid is doing is it's focusing the light. It's doing that, but it's doing something a little bit more. I think of it like this. It is making the light fall to darkness more quickly. So what I mean by that is it's the same kind of idea as focusing. Basically, it falls to shadow very abruptly. So part of that is not as much light is reaching our subject. It's going to get darker faster, which is why adding the grid cuts some light. But also, you're going to see another change. Not only will the light be focused vertically on my subject, but less light is going to reach the background because it will fall to shadow more quickly. So let's take a look at that. And again, I've already compensated for the change in exposure. Okay. All right, so taking a look at this, the photo looks completely different with the grid. The background is not a little bit darker, it is a lot darker. It's almost completely black. And then if you look head to toe where that light is focused, I mean, there's no light on her feet, but midway down her legs, it's fallen to dark shadow. I focused it here, and then the light's also gotten darker before it reached the background. So I already mentioned that with a ProPhoto Beauty dish, there's only one size grid. It's a 25-degree grid. And so right now, let's say that I don't want any light to spill on her jeans. I really just want that light to light from her head, maybe midway down her torso. But I don't have another grid to change. What can I do? Well, we already talked about this. I can bring the light in closer. And when I bring it in closer, it's going to focus that light even more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do just that. So you take a look at this photo. Again, you can see not much light on the floor, not much light on the background, but we're going to exaggerate that even more. So let me move this beauty dish in. Okay. And because I moved it in, it's going to get brighter, so I need to take another meter reading. All right. So got 2/3 of a stop brighter. All right. So now that light is focused even more. Basically, by the time I'm reaching her elbows, the light gets completely dark. And now that background is pure black. So sure, I'm going to add a grid to focus the light and to make the background get darker, but I can exaggerate that even more the closer I bring the light source to the subject. So these are two ways that you can control the spill and the focus of the light. So let's build on this even more. Let's say that I decide for her I want to take a 3/4 length shot. Okay, perfect. So I'll kind of crop just below her hands. And if you look, I mean, she is completely blended into the background because she's wearing a black shirt, and that background is now appearing to be black because no light is reaching it. Well, generally you don't want the subject to blend in with the background. So what you could do is you could add a rim light, or you can add a background light. But one of the things I like to do to add a little bit more interest, to add a little bit more depth to the background, is instead of just lighting the background evenly, I'm going to light it with a grid, because that grid is going to give me a halo of light. It's going to give me a glow of light. And so it's going to add a little bit more visual interest. So we're going to add a second light with a 20-degree grid. It's the widest grid that I have, so it'll give me kind of this nice glow behind her, which gives me separation. Great. One of the reasons that I've put this light in close to her is if I have the light far off to the side and pointed in, it's going to be more of an oval. The more centered that I can get it, it'll be more of a circle. In fact, if I'm not including full length, I often will put the light directly behind her, maybe on a floor stand, because that's what will give me the perfect circle instead of it being kind of an oddly shaped highlight. So let's take a look at this. All right, so now you can see that nice glow and that nice separation behind her, which I think is a lot interesting than just kind of throwing light everywhere. So these are a couple of ways you can use a grid. You can use a grid to focus the light. I can use a grid to make the background darker. I can use the grid to put a highlight of interest on the background. I could use a grid to put a spotlight on the face. There are many different ways you can use grids, but it's really all about controlling your light. There's one more thing that we should talk about when using grids. If you're shooting in a small space, grids can be a pretty powerful tool. For example, if you're shooting on a gray background or a light background and you want it to go darker, in a small space, it's hard to control and manage the light. But adding a grid gives you even more power. So let me demonstrate this point. We're going to put our subject right up against that background so that you can see how much a difference that grid will make. So let me move this background light out. Can I have you sit here? So she's less than 2 feet away from the background. Let me bring that light really close. And we've talked about the inverse square law. So if I want to try to get that background as dark as possible, I try to pull her out as far as possible. But in a small space, you don't have that much room to work. So, all right, so let's say this is as far out as I can pull her. And then the next thing I can do to make the background as dark as possible is I can bring my main light as close as possible. But in a small space, this might be the best you can get. I'm going to have the light just barely out of my frame. She's as far away from the background as I can get in that small space. And let me take a meter reading. Okay. So I'm going to adjust my exposure. All right, so let's say this is, using the inverse square law, that's as dark as I can get that background in a small space. Pull her as far away as possible, move that light in as close as possible. So now, looking at it, it's not dark, but this is where a grid is really going to help you. By adding that grid, the light will fall to darkness more quickly, and I can get that background a lot darker than I would be able to do otherwise. This is a beauty dish, but you can absolutely do this with a softbox, an octabox, whatever you have. So let me add that grid in. All right, and let me take a meter reading. Great. And same shot, but this time with a grid. And so you'll see, I didn't get my background completely black, but it's pretty close. It's a very, very dark gray. So a grid, yes, it focuses light. Yes, it can be a highlight on the background, but it can also give you more control if you're trying to get pure or dark backgrounds in a very small space.